Talk to me. Talk to me.
Hello and welcome. I'm Dan Gersten, host of Chatting with History, where you can listen in to conversations I have with some of the most famous characters in the history of Western civilization. And today's guest is no exception. It's David, or as he was more popularly known, Davy Crockett, a celebrated 19th century American folk hero, frontiersman, soldier, and politician, who in large part, well, thanks to Walt Disney, is commonly referred to as King of the Wild Frontier. So, without further delay, let's meet Davy Crockett. Congressman Crockett, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here, and I sure love talking. And please call me David. While millions of Americans may know me as Davy, I really was called David most of my life.
Thank you. And David it is. I'll venture to say that while millions of Americans know of your exploits as a frontiersman, a congressman, and a hero who died at the Alamo, fewer know of your ancestry and childhood. So, why don't we start there? Were you born on a mountaintop in Tennessee?
No, I wasn't. I was born August 17th, 1786, close to the banks of the Nolichucky River near the community of Limestone in what is now Greene County in northeastern Tennessee. At the time of my birth, that area was part of the autonomous territory known as the State of Franklin.
The State of Franklin?
Yep. Was once part of western North Carolina, which ceded the land to the newly founded United States to pay off Revolutionary War debt. Became part of North Carolina again, but residents there didn't want that, and so Franklin ran as an autonomous territory. Why, it even applied for statehood, but fell 2 votes short for admission. In 1789, the government of Franklin entirely collapsed, and eventually the land was ceded by North Carolina to form what was known as the Southwest Territory, which is now the state of Tennessee.
Wow. I didn't know that, not being from that area of the country. Back to your ancestry and childhood.
Sure thing. Now, my ancestry is primarily Irish, English, Scottish, and French, with the family name of Crockett deriving from the French. In France, the family converted to Protestantism, and as Huguenots, they had to flee to escape religious persecution by the Catholic Church, heading to Ireland and then to the American colonies. My great-grandpappy, William David Crockett, was registered as having been born in New Rochelle, New York in 1709.
New Rochelle, New York. That's a city in Westchester County, just north of New York City. Founded in 1688 by French Huguenots, many of whom, came from the city of La Rochelle in France. Both of my older children grew up there, and they graduated from New Rochelle High School. But I'll bet that was long after your family was there.
Yep, about as long as a short nap on a bed of porcupine quills. Anyway, I was the 5th of 9 children born to John Crockett and Rebecca Hawkins. I was named for my pappy's grandpappy, who was killed by Creek and Cherokee Indians in 1777 at his home near Rogersville, Tennessee. In 1790, the family moved to Morristown, Tennessee, where we built and ran a tavern.
And what about your childhood, and your schooling?
Well, my early years were filled with adventure, hardship, and travel. When I was 8 years old, I convinced my pappy to teach me to hunt with a rifle. When I was 12 years old, I was bound out to a cattle drover named Jacob Seiler, from whom I had to escape through a snowstorm when he forcefully kept me past the end of my contract. And when I was 13, I was sent off to school, but I dropped out after whooping the tar out of a school bully who embarrassed me on my 4th day there.
I want to ask you about dropping out of school, but first, you mentioned that you asked your father to teach you to hunt with a rifle when you were 8. So, what's with this killing of a bear, when you were only 3?
Did George Washington chop down that cherry tree?
No. I mean, when George was on Chatting with History, I mean, he said that story was bogus.
Well, so's this tale. Totally made up. Tall tale if there ever was one, and I should know. I'm one of the best tall tale tellers there ever was.
Well, I'm not sure of that. I mean, it seems, some of today's Republican and Tea Party politicians and pundits are some pretty big tall tale tellers, too.
Yep, I've been noticing. There's a difference between me and them, though.
Oh? How so?
My tales were in fun. Most folk knew them for what they were, and we all had a good laugh afterwards. Those Republican and Tea Party fellas of today, hell, they're just plain nasty, and there's nothing funny about their exaggerations and distortions of the truth.
Anyhow, back to your schooling. So you went to school and then you dropped out after a run-in with a bully. I mean, why drop out? I mean, you whooped the tar out of him, didn't you?
Yep, but I feared the bully would go after me with some of his friends backing him up. And when I didn't know what the teacher would do to punish me, so I just stopped going to school.
So, I mean, what happened?
Well, the teacher eventually wrote to my pappy to ask why I wasn't in school, and boy was he angry with me. Wouldn't listen to my side of the story and was only concerned that some goods he had traded for my education had gone to waste. I thought for sure I was going to get a licking, so I just took off. Spent 3 years roaming from town to town, sharpening my skills as an outdoorsman, hunter, and trapper.
Did you ever go back home?
Oh, sure. When I was around 16, I returned home, which was now a tavern on the road between Knoxville, Tennessee and Abingdon, Virginia. Showed up unannounced and was unnoticed until my older sister Betsy recognized me.
And how was the reception?
Couldn't been better. They were delighted to see me. Plus, Pappy owed some money to fellows named Abe, Wilson, and John Kennedy. No, not that John Kennedy. And I was hired off to work off the debt. When those debts were settled, Pappy told me I was free to leave, but I hung around and went to work for Kennedy and myself. All told, I worked at a number of things, including being a wagoneer, hat maker, and farmhand.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot of different stuff. Anyhow, of what were you most proud?
Well, when I was 18 years old, I taught myself to read and write and cipher. Yep, I'm most proud of that.
Cipher?
Yeah, cipher. Oh, that's what some of us called adding and subtracting, because it was like a puzzle, and many of us just had a heap of trouble trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, seems to be still true today in many parts of the country. I mean, especially in your neck of the woods. I mean, what with relatively low education levels in English, math, and science. Anyhow, moving on. When you were 19 years of age in 1805, you were in love and about to be married.
Yep, I was engaged to Margaret Elder, but she changed her mind and married someone else. I was truly heartbroken and decided I was only born for hardships, misery, and disappointment.
Yeah, pretty dramatic, no?
Well, I've been known to exaggerate every now and then.
Anyhow, that hardship and misery and disappointment, well, I mean, that changed pretty quickly. So really now, I mean, how heartbroken were you?
Reckon I wasn't that heartbroken after all. One day before my 20th birthday in 1806, I married Mary Finley in Jefferson County, Tennessee. Polly, well, that's what Mary was commonly called, and me had 2 sons and a daughter. And we were doing pretty good. In 1813, when game ran scarce, I moved my family to Franklin County, Tennessee, creating a new settlement on Beans Creek called Kentuck. Polly died in 1815, and that same year I married Elizabeth Patton, a widow with kids of her own.
Wow. I mean, you sure didn't believe in grieving. I mean, did you? I mean, marrying months after your wife of 9 years dies?
Well, it was a tough life in those days and in those parts, and a man needed companionship and a good home to return to after a day hunting, fighting Injuns, and telling tall tales. Plus, a woman needed the protection and affection of a man. Seemed only natural not to let too much time pass without picking up and starting over.
Yeah, I guess so. At least you didn't leave Polly for another woman when she was sick, as some celebrities and politicians do these days.
Nah, I wouldn't do that. Back then, we took the oath of marriage seriously. Not like they do today, going in and out of marriage more frequently than a buck does with a doe in heat.
Yeah, but you did leave Polly in a manner of speaking. To join the military.
Yep, the Creek War was going on, and in 1813 I enlisted in the militia.
The Creek War? Why don't you tell us about that war? It's been a long time since I watched your exploits on Disney.
Well, some believe the Creek War started as a civil war within the Creek or Muskogee Nation. Others associate it with the War of 1812 between the U.S. and Great Britain. Regardless, while some Indians wanted to avoid conflict with us and were prepared to give up their traditions, others, called Red Sticks, didn't feel that way, and periodically American settlers were killed. In July of 1813, there was a skirmish known as the Battle of Burnt Corn, which broadened the Creek Civil War to include American forces. In August of 13, Indians attacked and killed somewhere between 400 and 500 people in Alabama in an incident known as the Fort Mims Massacre. Eventually, the militias of Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee joined the fray under the joint command of Colonel Andrew Jackson. In March of 1814, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend was a decisive victory for Jackson, and that basically ended Creek resistance and resulted in the Treaty of Fort Jackson, forcing the Creek Nation to cede 23 million acres of land to the United States.
So, what did you do in the war, David?
Well, in September of 1813, I joined the 2nd Regiment of Tennessee Volunteer Mounted Riflemen. I was made a scout because of my skills as a hunter, trapper, and woodsman, and was part of a contingent that avenged Fort Mims by launching a retributive massacre of the Indian village of Taloosahatchee. When my enlistment expired, I returned home to Polly and my family.
But, you re-upped about a year later.
Well, that I did. Re-enlisted in 1814 as a 3rd Sergeant in Captain John Cowan's company. We had just taken Pensacola, and I spent much of my time ferreting out unfriendly Indians from the Florida swamps. Did that until I was discharged about a year later with the rank of 4th Sergeant.
Discharged in 1814? That's strange because I can recall watching Disney and seeing you be a hero in the Battle of New Orleans, the final major battle in the War of 1812, and that took place on January 8th, 1815.
Another one of those tall tales. No, I was home with Polly and the kids while that battle was going on, and anybody who says I wasn't is doing nothing more than making up their own stories.
So, it's 1815. Polly dies and you marry Elizabeth Patton. Then what?
Well, in fall of 1815, I explored Alabama, thinking I was going to settle there. Why, I nearly died from malaria and was left for dead. About a year later, we did move, but to territory that was soon to become Lawrence County, Tennessee, and not to Alabama. Settled at the head of Shoal Creek. In November of 1818, I became a Justice of the Peace and held that position until 1819, when I resigned. Still, I remained the town commissioner of Lawrenceburg, a post I first held the year before in 1818.
And so began your political career.
Yep. On New Year's Day in 1821, I resigned as commissioner to run for a seat in the Tennessee legislature as the representative of Lawrence and Hickman counties. In August of that year, I won the election and once in office, took an active interest in public land policy regarding the West. After the session, we moved to what is now Gibson County in West Tennessee, and from there I was again elected to the Tennessee legislature in 1823.
And then, you set your political sights higher.
You bet. In 1824, I lost my first bid for a seat in Congress, but I was not deterred. And in 1826, I was elected to the House of Representatives as a Jacksonian Democrat.
A Jacksonian Democrat? I mean, what in the world was that?
Well, in the 1820s, the Democratic-Republican Party of Jefferson splintered into Jacksonians and anti-Jacksonians, with the Jacksonians favoring a political movement toward greater democracy for the common man, typified by Andrew Jackson and his supporters, which, at the time, included me.
Thank you. You know, did going to Congress change you?
Nope. Some tale tales that on my way to Congress I told people, I'm that same Davy Crockett, French from the backwoods, half horse, half alligator, a little touched with the snapping turtle, can wade the Mississippi, leap the Ohio, ride upon a streak of lightning, and slip without a scratch down a honey locust.
Wow, you're right. That is some tale. Anyhow, you know, as a congressman, I mean, what were some of the issues that you supported?
I supported the rights of squatters, who were barred from buying land in the West without already owning property. I also railed against some of my congressional colleagues who were willing to spend taxpayer dollars to help a widow of a U.S. Navy man who had lived beyond his service but would not contribute their own salary for a week to her cause.
You know, not so different today. I mean, here we are, you know, in 2012, and our nation is experiencing one of the worst economic downturns in our history, and, I mean, with a huge deficit. And one side of the political aisle wants to cut social programs, I mean, for Americans while enjoying taxpayer-paid benefits and having a ludicrous taxpayer-paid pension. I mean, you'd think that if they want average Americans to make sacrifices, you know, that they'd lead by example.
Yep, Dan, politicians are no different today than they were in my day, when you couldn't trust them to do what's right by the people any more than you could trust that a possum was dead and not just playing dead.
Well, you won re-election to Congress in 1828, and then, I mean, you had a falling out with President Jackson over his policies regarding the removal of Native Americans from their tribal lands, you know, as well as general land policies.
Yep. I didn't feel it was right kicking people off a land that was theirs long before we got here. Still, that pissed off old Hickory, and when I ran for re-election in 1830, Jackson endorsed my opponent, and I ended up losing the election.
You know, it was about this time that the Whigs, I mean, who were anti-Jacksonians, I mean, viewed you as presidential material, you know, and they sought to make you their star.
Yep. They were in love with me and my charm and charisma, arranged to have a number of books published about me that made the tall tales I told about myself look pretty small. Anyway, with their support, I was re-elected to Congress in 1832, where I was best known for delivering folksy speeches and anti-Jackson rants.
In 1834, your autobiography titled A Narrative of the Life of Davy Crockett, written by himself, it was published, and you went east to promote your book. You know, some believe that promoting of the book contributed to your losing re-election to Congress that year, which basically marked the end of your political career.
Sure did. Was just sick and tired of all the political games being played. Anyhow, I told the people of my district that I would serve them as faithfully as I had done, but if not, you may all go to hell and I will go to Texas.
Anyhow, I mean, in 1835, that's exactly what you did. When on November 1st of that year, you left your home near Rutherford in West Tennessee, I mean, with 3 other men, and set off to explore Texas.
Yes, I did. After traveling through places like Memphis and Little Rock, I arrived in Nacogdoches, Texas in early January 1836, and in exchange for the promise of land, I volunteered to serve the Provisional Government of Texas for 6 months.
And that's how you ended up at the Alamo.
Yep, traveled with 5 others to San Antonio de Bejar and camped outside of town. On February 8th of 1836, I arrived at the Alamo, a former Roman Catholic mission and fortress compound that had once housed a Mexican army group. After the siege of Bejar by the Texian army, the Alamo was surrendered and occupied by Texian soldiers under the joint command of William Travis and James Bowie. Yep, the guy who invented the Bowie knife and who, like me, had a TV show back in the 1950s.
So, why don't you tell us about the siege of the Alamo?
Well, On February 23rd, that's about 2 weeks after I arrived there, a Mexican army led by General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna arrived and immediately initiated a siege. Their artillery kept up a near constant bombardment, every day moving closer and closer to the Alamo. On the 25th, about 200 to 300 Mexican soldiers crossed the San Antonio River and took cover about 100 yards from the Alamo's wall. Still, we prevailed that day.
And what were you doing?
I and others fired rifles, picking off Mexicans wherever we could. And on March 3rd, I was one of 3 men sent out from the Alamo to find Texian reinforcements that had advanced to join the garrison at the Alamo. Just before daylight on the 4th, I managed to help half the reinforcements break through Mexican lines and enter the Alamo. The other half were driven away by Mexican cavalry.
So, why don't you tell us about the Alamo's fall?
Well, on March 6th, the Mexican army attacked before dawn when most of us were sleeping. When the north outer walls of the Alamo complex were breached, we were all to fall back to the barracks and the chapel. But my men and I were too far away to take shelter. We defended the low wall in front of the church, and the fighting was, ferocious, as we ended up using knives and our rifles as clubs. About 90 minutes after the battle started, it ended with all of the defenders, including me, dead.
Some claim you were alive when the battle ended and then executed.
An eyewitness report from a former slave named Joe, whose life was spared since he was a non-combatant, says I died at the Alamo, and why don't we just leave it at that?
Fair enough. Besides, claims of you being taken alive and then executed have never been substantiated and are regarded with suspicion. Anyhow, before we go, I have a number of topics to discuss with you. First off, did you wear a coonskin cap?
Rarely. Only when making public appearances because it's what the public wanted and it enhanced my reputation as a frontiersman. However, when it came to everyday life, not a chance, especially because those caps smelled.
Wow. Coonskin caps, thanks to Walt Disney's portrayal of you in the 1950s with Fess Parker, outsold other Crockett-related merchandise, raking in at least $100 million in sales.
Yep, really something, no? Guess old Disney had some family in the coonskin cap business.
Moving on. Did you have a rifle named Betsy?
Yes, I did. Had 2 of them, actually. Or was it 3? Regardless, none of them was the rifle I used during my youth or during the Creek War, and certainly not at the Battle of New Orleans, as I wasn't even there. Anyhow, the stories about my rifles are much like the story of my life, where you don't know what's truth and what's made up. Betsy was a .40 caliber flintlock the Tennessee State Assembly had given me as a gift around 1822. Or was that old Betsy? Anyway, that was the rifle I took with me to Texas, and it was lost at the Alamo. Then again, maybe it wasn't. Then there was another rifle called Old Betsy, or maybe that was Pretty Betsy, which was given to me in 1832 by the Whig Society of Philadelphia when I was re-elected to Congress as a member of their party. As for who Betsy is, historians say she was either my second wife or my sister. Regardless, I'm not saying because I like to keep people guessing.
Yeah, sometimes it can get pretty confusing sorting through all the different stories and accounts there are of your life. Anyhow, did you really have a friend named Georgie Russell, a character played by Buddy Ebsen in the Disney series about your life?
Maybe. It's been a while and I haven't read my journal since I don't know when, where supposedly I mention him.
And did you really encounter Mike Fink, king of the keelboaters? Did he even exist?
Mike Fink did exist, and he's a semi-legendary brawler and riverboatman who exemplified the tough and hard-drinking men who ran keelboats up and down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. As far as he and I crossing paths, there's no real evidence of that happening. We were both folk heroes of what was then the West, and we both had a reputation for tall tales. not unexpected that we'd be linked in some of those tall tales, as may have been done by Disney, who produced 2 shows with Mike Fink and myself.
Well, we've just about run out of time, and I'd like to thank you, David Crockett, for coming on the show. You know, as customary, are there any parting comments you'd like to leave with our audience?
Why, of course, Dan. How could a politician and a teller of tall tales pass up an opportunity like this? First off, and in no particular order, I was considered by some to be an Indian killer, having participated in a massacre of Creeks at Taloosahatchee to avenge what happened at Fort Mims, and then when ferreting them out of the Florida swamps. And it's true that my great-grandpappy, for whom I was named, was killed by them. Still, I wasn't in favor of forcing Indians, Native Americans, off a land they had known as theirs long before we even landed on this soil. And I wasn't in favor of relocating them hundreds and hundreds of miles away from their native land and then sequestering them like they were prisoners and then having corrupt white Indian agents get rich off their misery. I know that many consider Andrew Jackson to be a great president and a man of the people. Way I reckon, his treatment of our Indian brethren is a stain upon his legacy and the primary reason I broke with him. Second, I wasn't the most learned of men, and I wasn't the most eloquent of speakers. Still, I taught myself to write and read and to act and subtract when I was 18 years old. Kind of disappointing that many of today's Americans, with a lot of them from my neck of the woods, are more illiterate when it comes to English than our folks whose native language isn't English. Third, I'm credited with saying I would rather be beaten and be a man than be elected and be a little puppet dog. I have always supported measures and principles and not men. I have acted fearless and independent, and I never will regret my course. I would rather be politically buried than to be hypocritically immortalized. I also said I cannot nor will not forsake principle to follow after any party, and I do hope there may be a majority in Congress that may be governed by the same motive. Let me tell you, I have been following the shenanigans of today's congressfolk, and I wouldn't be happy being among them. Well, I thought Congress in my day was dysfunctional at times and playing party politics. Hell, you have members of Congress who have made party politics a science, and if they have principles related to serving the common good, I've not seen them. Yeah, I'd be more to see a pig fly than some of those Republicans and Tea Party lawmakers favor the common good. Lastly, and on a related note, I have a reputation as being one of the biggest tall tale tellers there ever was. Books and even a play were written about me featuring my own exaggerations of myself and my exploits, and even having exaggerations about me that weren't even mine. Still, my tall tales were all in fun and were always told with a wink in my eye, and any mischief I caused was not malicious. Not the case today. There are a lot of tall tale tellers in positions of leadership and authority who tell their tall tales to purposefully mislead people and enrich themselves. Telling lies as if they were the truth and spinning yarns better than a spider spins a web. Sure makes me just a tad upset with these folks, and I wish I had old Betsy with me so that I could shoot the bullshit out of them. Just saying.
Words of wisdom from David Crockett, king of the wild frontier. You know, a most interesting person whose life, though exaggerated, entertained an entire generation of baby boomers, like myself. So until our next Chatting with History, this is Dan Gersten, reminding all of you that if you're going to tell a tall tale, do it with a wink and a pair of smiling eyes. Thank you for watching.
Talk to me. Talk to me.
Davy Crockett. I'm king of the wild frontier. Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee.
green estate in the land of the free. Raised in the woods so he knew every tree. Killed him a bar when he was only 3.
Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier.
I'm the king of the wild frontier.